Now, it's The Law Show on CL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law.
The boys are back in town, the boys are back in town. I said, the boys are back in town.
Thin Lizzy, the boys are back in town. The boys are back in studio. They're Irish, right, Thin Lizzy? I think so, yeah. This is The Law Show. We're talking about immigration law. Rudy Kisher and Alex Stojkovic are back in town, back in the studio, talking about immigration and citizenship law. Their firm is MKS in downtown Vancouver, and you're moving at the end of this month, right? The end of June?
Yeah, the end of June, we're moving down to 688 West Hastings, so the corner of Hastings and Granville. We're moving from our Yaletown location to take on a whole new floor with a little bit of view over the water.
And who flips to who gets the good office?
Well, we're having an arm wrestle after this episode, actually.
Because that's important. Now, we had you on recently talking about the new law that's in Parliament, and we're going to shift it here to British Columbia. So you have the BC Provincial Nominee Program, also known as BCPNP. What is this, and how does it work in terms of federal regulations in British Columbia?
Well, you're correct, and when you talk about, immigration is generally seen as a federal jurisdiction, but the provinces have been able to sort of make inroads in getting some control over that. And about 16 years ago, the BC got its own what's called BC, as you said, the BC Provincial Nominee Program, which is a program that allows the province to select who comes into British Columbia.
So is it just that we put forward these nominees? Is that how it works?
Well, we have our own sort of selection criteria in terms of who is eligible, right, to come to Canada, and then the federal government is left with who is what we call admissible. So they'll do the final checks in terms of, is there a security issue with this person, is there a criminal issue, is there a medical issue, but the province, looking usually at economic reasons, says we want these people to come to Canada. And traditionally, the way this program started around 1999, 2000. It was a very, very small program. At that time, the NDP was in power. They didn't like the program. They sort of, when it was allocated to them, they really didn't act on it. It was under study. They didn't move ahead. And it really wasn't until we had the Liberals in power that this program really took off. And it's yeah.
I was just going to say, so this was a power that the federal government gave to each province.
Yeah.
So they basically said, you get a small percentage of people that you can sort of decide who you want to come in. Is that basically what happened?
So essentially, immigration, it's not very well known this, but immigration in the Constitution is actually a joint area of jurisdiction.
Okay.
Traditionally, because of the federal government's sort of paramountcy and for practical reasons, they have taken the lead on immigration and citizenship. However, it is an area of dual jurisdiction under the Constitution, and so there is an ability to make agreements with the provinces relating to immigration selection. So for your listeners, essentially every immigration application has two aspects to it. You need to be selected, which means that's what we refer to as a selection decision. You meet the criteria of a category that you've applied under, and you have to be admissible. That means you're allowed to be in Canada at all. So medically admissible, criminally admissible, you have to have a passport, all of these admissibility requirements. Now, what essentially the nominee programs are is an outsourcing of just that selection portion to the province from the federal government. They still handle all of the admissibility side, but the selection is done by the province.
So
directly.
I guess it could be argued that, people in Saskatchewan are looking for different types of people than somebody who in Quebec or the Maritimes.
That's right.
Right?
That's exactly the whole purpose.
So what happened is Quebec, many decades before this started, felt that because they were a distinct society, that they should have the ability to attract the kind of immigrants they want, and the feds really shouldn't have control over this. And what other provinces started complaining about is the majority of immigrants were going to Montreal and going to Toronto, and BC really didn't have that much a problem because of our nice weather, etc. They didn't have a problem attracting immigrants. But what they found, places like Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta weren't getting immigrants, and they said, well, if you let it, so the feds said, well, if you guys want this, we'll let you some power and you pick them, and that way you try and get those people to come to your province.
But
right?
of all of the 300,000 plus people that come to Canada in a year, it's not divided 10 ways. And
no.
So what's the percentage of, what's the number that each province is allowed to select?
Well, they negotiate. So every agreement is a negotiation. They start off very small numbers, and this year we're looking at probably BC's got an allocation of, I think, 5,300 applications. That's applications of not total immigrants, right? Yeah, so that they will allow, and that allows their dependents. So you're looking at about 15,000 people a year.
Okay, so was there a relaunch of this program?
So essentially what's happened is because of express entry rolling out on the federal side in January of 2015 and the problems with it, specifically that a lot of people who've registered have had no ability to be selected because their comprehensive ranking scores are too low, huge numbers of typically they would not get 4,000 or 5,000 applicants in the provincial nominee program annually. They weren't even meeting their annual quotas.
So you had this system, but they weren't getting anywhere close to it.
Well, they were getting close, but they weren't necessarily taking more applications than they could actually process.
Right.
Well, what happened in 2014 is that they were overwhelmed. They got close to 10,000 applications in 1 year, which is double their capacity. So in 2015, they had 2 sustained periods where they had to close the program.
Mm-hmm.
And the last closure was in September. And they've been basically trying to work on that 2014 backlog from September of 2015 until now. January 27th, they reopened the program partially, committing to trying to complete by the 15th of May most of the backlog from 2014. They've achieved most of that now. And they've started looking at the rest of the year for new applications. But to put some sort of controls on them, they've included a scoring system that has categorized various applications by category and by point total.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry, one quick question. So you guys work for companies and individuals, people trying to bring employees into the country and people trying to come into Canada. You get the push and pull from both sides, people that you represent. Is it easier to just go through the federal system or to go through the provincial system?
I think
because you're sounding to me like there's another set of criteria you've got to hit.
It depends on when you talk to us and what month we're in.
And it depends on the person. I mean, this is an important point you're talking about to our listeners to understand. It's not a one-size. Immigration is never one size fits all.
So you look at the applicant and say, I think you're better to go through the provincial system.
100%. That's
right.
the value added that we give, and that's why we recommend people come in for a consultation. Because,
and what I've learned on previous shows is the sands are always shifting.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you just mentioned the fact that it was shut for over a year.
Yeah, so that program was a great program. We preferred that BCPNP program for the longest time because it was a fast-track program. The way that the BC Liberal Party, the way they set it up, the BC government set it up, it was an employer-friendly program. Mm-hmm. So I loved it because somebody came to me, if you had an employer that was willing to hire you, pay you a reasonable wage, and support your application, they would process your application in about 8 weeks.
So you're talking people working in the gaming industry, working for a video game company.
That's a great example.
Or tech, or
engineers,
engineering,
VPs of companies, you name it. I could get you a designation that you were going to immigrate, that you have been approved by the province for selection in 8 weeks.
Now, when it went to the feds, how long did that take?
Well, it might take another year, but at least we knew you were on
in the system,
track, right? Now what happened was when the feds changed their system last year, this whole program got backlogged to a year, and they relaunched because all of a sudden the processing times went from 8 weeks to 14 months, which to them was unmanageable. They didn't like it, and so they've revamped the program to a similar where they're only going to take people, they're only going to select a certain amount of people to apply, and the rest of the people, you can't just sort of apply if you meet. They're gonna have a quota every month.
So you have the federal system impacted the provincial number of people that applied. So now you have the new federal government that's changing the immigration law. So you think it's going to ease off the pressure on the provincial program?
Well, what the provincial government has restricted who can apply. So they're saying instead of you can't apply until we decide we're going to let you apply. So it's taken off the pressure in the sense that they don't have a bunch of people waiting in queue. What they're doing is they're sitting in this pool, and the province is coming along saying, okay, we're going to take this 100 this month. Everybody else, you got to, wait till next month. So now, I think I was talking, on another show I was talking to you about how the issue we have now is we've got lots of people here, 150,000 people in the country on study permits, probably about, more than that here on work permits. A lot of those people want to immigrate, and they're looking for avenues. And now what they're doing is they can't apply. They have to wait till they're chosen to be allowed.
So they're in a pool, and they get pulled out of the pool.
Some of them get pulled out. And very few right now. Right now, the province is taking less than, I think, about 100 a month.
No wonder you guys are busy, because I can't even, you're explaining it to me, and it seems convoluted.
Now,
that's why we need the experts.
I should add some of the policy elements to this. First, the province does not want this allocation. It wants more.
Right.
I mean, the province went to the feds asking for, I'm told, between 7,500 and 8,500.
And so let's give this in context.
They were only given 5,500.
So 5,500. So give us some context. How many people come to British Columbia in a given year that are trying to?
You're your listeners might be surprised that we were taking more immigrants in the early 2000s and the late 1990s in gross numbers than now. Now, that's slightly distorted by the fact that we're not entirely sure how many of that number, because the governments both basically look at landings versus another figure, which are intra-country migration. When
Intra-province, yeah.
Intra-province, when people
Oh,
move
so
from
they
one
could
province to
come
the
into
other.
Quebec and then end up in British
For
Columbia.
example,
right?
and we
Yeah.
don't know if that's 5% or 8% to the totals, but as a general rule, we take, in the last decade, 40 to 50,000 is pretty much a standard year for us. We've been as low as 38 in the last decade. In the 90s,
It's surprising because I think a lot of people are seeing the fast change of our city in the last few years, with so many people coming, we think, that but they're not immigrating.
Yeah, but look, people don't walk around with people don't walk around with their status, posted on their forehead.
Which
I
is
mean,
good.
they have some people are visitors, some people are long-term residents, but who don't have status because they like being here 4 months of the year. Others are study permit, work permit holders. We don't know who's a permanent resident who isn't it.
So you're saying it's only 45,000?
It's approximately, yeah.
That'd be probably the maximum. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, there are in other years we've taken more over 50. So we've actually, in terms of gross numbers, we're not going up in terms of immigration.
I mean, my
we're going
understanding
down.
is, the province is growing faster than that, but that's, as Alex mentioned, that's inter-province migration. So right now we're seeing a lot of people coming in from Alberta, right? They're coming home after having spent 10 years working in the oil patch, and that's causing the growth.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to pick up on the BCPNP, which stands for the BC Provincial Nominee Program, the changes that are happening on the federal side and how it's affecting people coming into country around immigration law. We have Rudy Kisher and Alex Stojkovic here from MKS in downtown Vancouver. We'll be back on The Law Show.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.